At 5:12 in the morning, I woke up to a sound no homeowner should ever hear outside their bedroom window. Bang, then another. Bang, then a woman screaming my name from the driveway. I ran outside barefoot in the dark and saw my mother's home health nurse standing beside her car with both front tires shredded, a cooler of emergency medication tipped over on the gravel, and two black metal spike strips bolted across the private lane that led to my house. Bolted, not dropped, not forgotten, bolted into the pavement. The nurse had been coming to deliver my mother's medication before sunrise, because my mother's heart monitor had flagged an overnight warning. Instead, her car hit the spikes halfway up my driveway easement, blew both front tires, and stopped dead in the narrowest part of the lane. Then my porch light caught something worse. A small sign wired to a wooden stake beside the spikes. Resident vehicles only. Trespassers will be disabled. Disabled. That was the word my neighbor chose. My 78-year-old mother was inside, waiting for medication. Her nurse was crying in my driveway. And someone had installed a trap on the only legal access route to my home. By 6 a.m., the sheriff was there. By 7:30, the HOA president was telling everyone the spikes were a traffic calming measure. By noon, my mother was in an ambulance because the delayed medication turned a warning into a hospital visit, and by Friday, the HOA sent me a violation notice for maintaining an unsafe driveway, allowing unauthorized medical traffic and creating conflict over community security devices. Community security devices. That was what they called tire spikes. Then my neighbor, Grant Mallory, sent me a bill for $11,800, claiming the nurse had damaged his newly installed access control equipment. His spikes destroyed her tires, delayed my mother's medication, blocked emergency access, and he wanted me to pay him. That was when fear stopped being fear and turned cold, because Grant had made one mistake he did not know about. My driveway camera had caught him at 2:43 a.m. It caught his truck. It caught the drill. It caught him bolting the spikes into the easement. And it caught the HOA president standing beside him, holding a flashlight. 3 weeks later, a sheriff's deputy would read my recorded easement out loud. The county fire marshal would label the spikes an emergency access obstruction. The HOA's insurance carrier would deny coverage for intentional misconduct, and Grant's security device would cost him $132,000 in medical delay damages. Vehicle repair, legal fees, emergency remediation, fines, and restitution. But that morning, standing barefoot on cold gravel while my mother's medication leaked from a cracked cooler, all I knew was this. My neighbor had turned my driveway into a trap, and the HOA had called it safety. I live at the end of a private lane in a small HOA community outside Knoxville, Tennessee. The kind of place people describe as quiet until they start arguing about who is allowed to use the road. My house sits behind 3 other homes on a rear parcel. It is not fancy. It is a 1-story ranch with a deep porch, a gravel turnaround, and a sloping backyard that drops toward a creek. I bought it 8 years ago because it was simple, private, and accessible enough for my mother to move in after her second heart surgery. My mother, Elaine, had always been impossible to slow down. She raised 3 kids, worked 31 years as a school secretary, remembered every birthday in the family, and still folded towels like the linen closet, had a military inspector. When her heart started failing, she pretended it was just age. When the doctors sent her home with a monitor, oxygen backup, timed medications, and nurse visits, she called it a little extra paperwork. It was more than paperwork. It was schedules. Morning medication, evening medication, emergency medication stored cold, nurse visits, delivery windows, ambulance access, oxygen tank checks, battery backups, and one narrow private lane that absolutely had to remain open. When I bought the house, my closing attorney explained the driveway. Easement. Twice, the lane began at the public road, passed between 2 front lots, crossed a strip the HOA maintained for drainage, then continued to my property at the rear. The deed gave my parcel a permanent easement for ingress, egress, emergency access, medical services, deliveries, utilities, and guests. The language was clear: no gate, no barrier, no spike strip, no bollard, no chain, no tire-damaging device, no obstruction or access control measure without written consent from the benefited parcel owner and approval from emergency services. I remember laughing when I first read tire-damaging device. It sounded oddly specific, like something from a cartoon. Years later, I would stop laughing for a while. The lane worked fine. Delivery drivers found me. Nurses came and went. Ambulances had enough room if they took the turn slowly. I kept the shoulder trimmed. I added reflectors. I paid out of pocket to have potholes filled because I never wanted my mother's access to depend on an HOA work order. Then Grant Mallory moved into the front house. Grant was a former security consultant. Though he said that phrase so often, it felt less like a job and more like a warning label. He had 2 cameras on his garage, one on his mailbox, one facing the lane, and a little sign near his front steps that said, "We don't call 911. I hated that sign, not because I was afraid of it, because people who advertise toughness usually want an excuse to perform it. Grant did not like cars passing his house. He complained about delivery vans. He complained about the nurse. He complained about my mother's medical supply deliveries. He complained about my nephew visiting after work, he said. The lane had become a corridor for uncontrolled outside traffic. Outside traffic. That was his phrase for people legally coming to my home. At the HOA meeting in March, Grant proposed access control measures. First, he wanted a gate. I objected and showed the easement. The board tabled it. Then he wanted removable bollards. I objected again. Then he suggested cameras and signage. I said cameras were fine if they did not block access, but no physical barrier could go in the lane. The HOA president, Marlene Price, looked annoyed. Marlene liked order, not legal order. Visual order. She believed if something looked official, residents should stop asking questions. She told me everyone had to compromise for community security. I said my mother's medical access was not a compromise item. Grant leaned back in his chair and said, "Nobody is trying to stop medical care. We're trying to stop abuse." Abuse, that was what he called a nurse driving up a recorded easement before sunrise. After that meeting, I emailed the board a copy of the easement and asked them to confirm in writing that no physical access control devices would be installed without my consent and emergency services approval. They did not confirm. They ignored it. 2 weeks later, reflective posts appeared along the lane, then warning signs. Then Grant started parking his truck halfway into the curve whenever he was unloading tools. I documented everything, not because I thought he would bolt spikes into the road, because my mother's doctor had told me one sentence I could not forget when she needs help. Minutes matter. Grant heard me say that once, and still he chose the spikes. The night before it happened, my mother's monitor alerted just after midnight. Her heart rhythm had gone irregular for a short period, then stabilized. The nurse line called me and asked questions. Was she awake? Was she short of breath? Was she dizzy? Did she have chest pressure? At first she said she was fine. Then she admitted she felt heavy. Not pain. Heavy. That was how she described fear when she did not want me to hear it. The on-call nurse arranged an early medication delivery and check-in. Her name was Paula. She had been to the house dozens of times. She knew the lane. She knew the turn. She knew to park close to the porch because my mother could not walk far on cold mornings. At 5:12, Paula hit the spikes. The first bang sounded like a gunshot. The second came half a second later. By the time I reached the driveway, Paula's car had rolled crooked against the gravel shoulder. Both front tires were shredded. The rims had scraped the pavement. The medication cooler had fallen from the passenger seat when she tried to grab it. One vial cracked inside its sleeve. Paula was shaking so badly. She could barely speak. She kept saying, "I didn't see them. I didn't see them." Of course she did not see them. They were black metal strips in a dark lane before sunrise, bolted low against the pavement, with no reflective marking, except a little homemade sign set off to the side like a threat. I called 911, then I called the nurse line, then I called Grant. He did not answer, but his garage camera light was on. The sheriff's deputy arrived first. He looked at the tires, the spikes, the sign, and Paula's scrapes from when she stumbled getting out of the car. Then, he asked, "Who installed the device?" I said. I had a guess. Grant came outside. 10 minutes later, in a fleece vest, carrying coffee like this, was a neighborhood inconvenience, he said. The spikes were temporary resident protection devices. The deputy asked whether he had installed them. Grant said the HOA had been discussing traffic control. The deputy asked again. Grant said he had assisted with a pilot security measure. A pilot security measure. Paula looked at him like he had slapped her. I said he had no permission to put anything in the easement, Grant said. The lane passed beside his property, and he had a right to protect the neighborhood from unauthorized vehicles, I said. Paula was my mother's nurse. He said medical visits should be pre-registered. Pre-registered, as if heart monitors care about visitor lists. The deputy told Grant not to touch the spikes until the scene was documented. Grant immediately said the spikes needed to stay because removing them would compromise security. That was when I saw Marlene, the HOA president, standing at the end of the lane in a raincoat. She did not look surprised. She looked irritated that there were police. My mother's medication was delayed, while Paula called for a replacement cooler and the nurse line arranged instructions. My mother kept insisting she was fine, which is how I knew she was not. By late morning, her breathing worsened. Her cardiologist told me to call an ambulance. This time, the ambulance crew parked at the public road and walked in because Paula's disabled car and Grant's spikes still blocked the lane. My mother spent 2 nights in the hospital. Grant spent those same 2 nights telling neighbors that I had exaggerated a medical situation to attack a security project. Then the HOA notice arrived. It said, my driveway area had become unsafe due to conflict, emergency vehicle disruption, and unauthorized medical traffic. It accused me of failing to coordinate access with the security committee and warned that continued escalation could result in fines. Unauthorized medical traffic. That phrase made me stare at the wall. My mother lived there. Her nurse was not traffic. She was care. Later, I learned Grant had submitted photos with the complaint. Not the full scene, not the spikes in darkness. Not Paula crying beside the shredded tires. Not my mother's ambulance arriving after the delay. He sent cropped photos. Paula's car blocking the lane, my driveway lights, my angry text, telling him to remove the spikes. A close-up of the damaged spike strip after the tires hit it. He cut out the sign that said trespassers will be disabled. He cut out the bolts in the pavement. He cut out the timestamp from my camera. He cut out himself. Then he sent me the bill. $11,800 for damaged access control equipment, labor, replacement parts, and security disruption. He said Paula's vehicle had damaged the spikes by driving over them. That was the exact moment I stopped thinking of Grant as arrogant. Arrogant was too small, Grant was dangerous, and now he had put it in writing. The first thing I did was back up the camera footage. Not once. 3 times cloud drive, external hard drive, USB stick in my attorney's office. The driveway camera had recorded Grant's truck entering the lane at 2:39 a.m. The headlights went dark near the curve. At 2:43, Grant stepped into frame wearing gloves and carrying a drill case. At 2:46, another figure appeared with a flashlight. Marlene, the HOA president, for nearly 20 minutes. The 2 of them worked in the lane. Grant positioned the spike strips. Marlene held the light. Grant drilled into the pavement. Marlene looked toward my house twice. At 3:08, Grant stood back, took a photo with his phone, and gave a thumbs up. At 5:12, Paula hit the spikes. 2 hours and 4 minutes later, there was no misunderstanding, no accidental obstruction, no forgotten equipment. They installed the spikes in the dark and left them there. I called an attorney named Jonah Reed, who handled property disputes, easement interference, and HOA litigation. I expected him to sound cautious. He did not. After watching the video, he said, "That is not traffic calming. That is a trap." Then he asked for the deed. I sent him the recorded easement. He called back 15 minutes later. "Your easement specifically prohibits tire-damaging devices," I said. I remembered that line. He said, "Good, because most people don't get facts this clean." Jonna sent preservation letters to Grant. Marlene, the HOA board, the management company, and Grant's attorney. He demanded all communications about traffic control, security measures, spike strips, bollards, gates, access restrictions. My Mother S. medical visits, Paula S. car, HOA complaints, photos submitted, and any approvals granted. He also notified the Sheriff S. office, County Fire Marshal, and my Mother S. Home Health Agency. The Home Health Agency acted fast. Paul S. supervisor sent a written statement confirming she was scheduled for an urgent medical visit, that she had used the access lane many times before, that the spikes were unmarked and unexpected, and that the tire damage delayed delivery and assessment. The ambulance report documented restricted access due to disabled vehicle and roadway obstruction. The hospital record documented delayed medication and worsening symptoms before transport. That did not mean Grant caused every medical issue my mother had. Jonah was careful about that. But it did mean his obstruction had created a documented delay during a medically urgent event that mattered. Then the fire marshal came. His name was Captain Luis Ortega. He did not smile when he saw the spikes. He walked the lane. Once measured the width, looked at the bolts, looked at the sign, looked at Paula's tire marks. Then he said, "Who thought this was legal?" Nobody answered because nobody guilty was present. His written determination was blunt. The spike strips constituted an unauthorized tire-damaging obstruction within a recorded emergency access easement. Such devices present a hazard to emergency vehicles, medical service providers, residents, and first responders. Immediate removal required. Future access control devices prohibited without written fire marshal approval and consent of benefited easement holder. Immediate removal, not relocation, not review. Removal. The sheriff's deputy returned that afternoon with a county road supervisor. They photographed the spikes, the bolts, the sign, and the damage to the lane. Grant came out and tried to argue that the spikes were not activated because they were fixed position deterrents, not mechanical devices, the deputy said. They disabled a nurse car. That ended that sentence. Then Jonah got the HOA emails. That was where the case changed from reckless to deliberate. Marlene had written to Grant 2 days before the incident. "We cannot officially approve spikes, too much liability, but residents are frustrated. If you install something temporary on your side of the lane, the board can discuss after." Grant replied, "The easement people will complain no matter what. Better to act first and let them prove damage. Act first, let them prove damage then, after Paula's car hit the spikes." Marlene emailed the management company. "Frame this as driveway conflict and unauthorized medical access. Do not mention security device until council reviews. Do not mention security device." That line made Jonah lean back in his chair and smile without humor. "People keep writing the case for you," he said. "The legal turn happened because of one phrase in the deed. No tire-damaging device. Not just no gate, not just no fence, not just no obstruction. No tire-damaging device." Whoever drafted the easement 20 years earlier had imagined exactly the kind of person Grant would become. Jonah explained that an HOA could regulate many things: paint colors, landscaping, parking rules, architectural styles, exterior lights, sometimes even camera placement. But it could not override a recorded easement that guaranteed access to my rear parcel. It could not authorize a device that disabled vehicles. It could not restrict medical providers from reaching a resident. And it definitely could not punish me for objecting after a nurse tires were shredded. During an urgent visit, the HOA tried to soften its position first. They said the violation notice was preliminary. Then they said the security committee had acted independently. Then they said Marlene had attended only as a concerned resident. Then Jonah sent them the 2:43 a.m. footage, Marlene holding the flashlight. Marlene looking toward my house. Marlene standing beside Grant while he drilled spikes into the lane. The next letter from the HOA came from a different attorney. That told me enough. Grant's attorney argued. The device was placed near the edge of his lot, not on my property. Jonah responded with the survey overlay. The lane easement crossed that area. The spikes sat inside it. My right was not ownership of every inch. It was the legal right to pass safely without obstruction. Grant could own soil beside the lane and still be barred from turning the lane into a trap. Then came the cropped photos. Jonah obtained the originals through the management company after demanding preservation. The difference was almost insulting. Grant's version showed Paula's car blocking the lane. The full image showed the shredded tires and spikes directly under them. Grant's version showed my text saying, "Remove those things before someone dies." The full thread showed I sent it after he refused to let the deputy remove the spikes. Grant's version showed a damaged metal strip. The full image showed it bolted across the travel path with a warning sign beside it. Grant's version showed my porch lights. The full camera video showed him installing the device in darkness 2 hours before the nurse arrived. The frame he created was about security. The truth was about obstruction. Then the Home Health Agency's insurer contacted Jonah. They wanted reimbursement for Paula's tire damage, missed service time, replacement nurse dispatch, medication handling issue, and risk reporting. My mother's supplemental insurer also requested documentation because the delay had affected transport and care coordination. Suddenly, Grant's 11,800 bill looked tiny compared to the damage trail he had created. The sheriff's office scheduled a formal site review with the fire marshal, HOA, Grant, and both attorneys. Marlene tried to resign as HOA president before it happened. The board did not accept it fast enough to save itself. Because once a president holds the flashlight while illegal spikes are bolted into an emergency easement, resignation does not erase the light. The site review happened on a cold Monday morning. The spikes had been removed under county order, but the bolt holes remained in the pavement like little black reminders. The sign was gone. Paula's tire marks were still visible near the curve. Grant arrived in sunglasses even though the sky was gray. Marlene arrived without her HOA name badge. The fire marshal stood beside the sheriff's deputy. Jonah stood beside me. Paula's supervisor came with a folder. The HOA's new attorney kept checking his phone like he wanted to disappear into it. The deputy began with the easement. He read it out loud. Ingress, egress, medical services, emergency access, no gate, no barrier, no spike strip, no bollard, no chain, no tire-damaging device. No obstruction or access control measure without written consent from the benefited parcel owner and approval from emergency services. Then he asked Grant whether he had my written consent. Grant said he believed HOA discussions covered the issue. The deputy asked again. Grant said no. Then the fire marshal asked whether Grant had fire marshal approval. Grant said it was not meant for emergency vehicles. Captain Ortega said, "Emergency vehicles do not schedule themselves around illegal devices." Then Jonah played the video. Everyone watched Grant's truck enter at 2:39 a.m. Everyone watched the headlights shut off. Everyone watched Grant step into frame with gloves and a drill. Everyone watched Marlene hold the flashlight. Everyone watched them bolt the spikes into the lane. Nobody spoke. Then Jonah played the 512 clip. Paula's headlights, the sudden jolt, the sound of both tires blowing, Paula stumbling out, the medication cooler tipping onto the gravel, my voice yelling from the porch. The video ended with Grant's sign in the porch light. "Trespassers will be disabled." The deputy asked Grant if Paula was a trespasser. Grant did not answer. Paula's supervisor did. She was a nurse. That sentence was enough. The county issued a written access violation. The fire marshal prohibited any future access control devices in the lane without written approval. The HOA withdrew its violation notice against me that afternoon. Grant's 11,800 demand was withdrawn 2 days later. The HOA's insurer opened a claim. Grant's homeowner's insurer reserved rights, then later denied coverage for intentional installation of a hazardous device. That meant Grant personally faced more of the cost than he expected. The HOA held an emergency board meeting the following week. Residents packed the clubhouse because by then everyone had heard about the spikes. Some came angry at me because Grant had framed it as a security issue. Then Jonah showed the easement language. The fire marshal order, The cropped complaint photos, Marlene's emails, and the 2:43 a.m. footage. The mood changed when the drill started in the video. You could feel it. People will argue about rules forever. But most people understand the sound of someone secretly bolting a trap into a road. One resident asked Marlene whether she knew my mother had medical providers coming regularly. Marlene said, "She knew there were frequent vehicles." The resident said, "That wasn't the question." Marlene had no clean answer. The board voted to remove her as president, suspend the security committee, and adopt emergency access rules requiring legal review, fire marshal approval, and written consent from all affected easement holders before any access-related device, sign, camera, barrier, bollard, or lane modification could be considered. The settlement took 4 months. Grant, the HOS insurer, and the management company's liability carrier eventually reached a documented resolution totaling $132,000. The largest part was not the spike strips themselves. It was the medical delay claim, Paula's vehicle damage, home health agency costs, attorney fees, fire marshal remediation, pavement repair, easement enforcement, insurance administration, HOA correction costs, and restitution tied to the intentional access obstruction. Grant also paid civil penalties for violating the county emergency access order and had to reimburse the HOA for part of the legal expense caused by his false and incomplete complaint materials. The money mattered, but what mattered more was the written correction. The HOA sent every resident a notice stating that the spike strips had never been approved, that my medical access rights were protected by recorded easement, that the violation against me had been issued in error, and that no resident had authority to restrict access to my property in error. That phrase again. HOAs love those 2 words. They sound cleaner than "we blamed the wrong person while your mother was in the hospital." But I took the correction anyway, because sometimes winning is not getting the apology you deserve. Sometimes winning is getting the record fixed so the next person has something to point to. My mother came home with new medication instructions, a different monitoring plan, and a stubborn refusal to use the wheelchair ramp until everyone stopped watching. She was still herself. That felt like a miracle. Paula came back too, in a rental car at first. The first morning she returned, I stood on the porch as she drove up the lane. She stopped near the curve, rolled down her window, and said, "No spikes today?" I said, "Not unless Grant wants to sell his house." She laughed. I needed that laugh more than she knew. The lane looked ordinary again after the pavement repair. Gravel shoulder, reflectors, a few patched holes, no sign, no spikes. No threat pretending to be security, just an access lane doing what an access lane is supposed to do, letting people reach the home at the end of it. Grant did not move immediately, but he changed. He stopped attending meetings. His security signs came down one by one. The garage cameras stayed, but they no longer pointed directly into the lane. Marlene sold her house that winter. The listing called the neighborhood peaceful and private. I wondered if she had ever understood how close she came to helping make it neither. I kept the spike strip case in a red folder labeled Access. Inside were the deed, the easement, the fire marshal order, the sheriff's report, the hospital documentation, the home health agency statement, the HOA correction letter, the settlement agreement, and a printed still from 2:43 a.m. Grant holding the drill, Marlene holding the flashlight. I kept that image because it reminded me that bad neighbors rarely start by saying they want to hurt you. They say security, they say community, they say traffic control, they say pilot program, they say temporary measure, and then one morning, someone you love is waiting for medication while a nurse stands in your driveway with shredded tires. So if your neighbor, HOA, security committee, or property manager ever tries to put a gate, chain, bollard, spike strip, camera post, planter, sign, or barrier in a driveway easement, do not wait until it becomes an emergency. Read your deed, pull the plat, save the emails, photograph the lane, ask the fire marshal, get the emergency access language in writing. And if someone tells you medical visits are unauthorized traffic, make them say it on paper. If this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Save the video and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who learned that access rights are not suggestions. They are lifelines, because I did not beat Grant by ripping the spikes out myself. I beat him by showing everyone exactly who put them there, and now, every time Paula drives up that lane before sunrise, her headlights pass over smooth pavement where the spikes used to be. No bang, no screaming, no trap, just the sound of help making it all the way home.